Hey besties, it's Cam from the internet, and I'm back on video and in my house, and there's actually daylight. If you're watching this on YouTube, you can see there's light coming in the window behind me. It's a miracle. I'm not filming this at insane o'clock p.m. Why, you might ask? Just because, honestly, I had no reason. I don't know where I was going with that. But hi. So by the time you're listening to this, it will have been my birthday the day before. You're listening to this, if you listen to it the day it comes out, you're listening to this on the 18th of April, and my birthday is April 17th. And so for this birthday observed episode, I wanted to talk about the notion of getting older and becoming a quote unquote fandom old, one might say. Not that I am particularly old. I do not believe, despite what the internet may tell you, that being 27 is particularly old. But I did grow up with a different notion, so let's talk about that. Now, when I think of birthdays, I always think about my 13th birthday first. Not because 13 was a particularly good year, it actually wasn't. Being 13 was a curse, as I'm sure it is for many of us, but because that birthday I asked for three things that would dictate the trajectory of the rest of my life. I asked for permission to make an email account, number one, so that I could, number two, make a tumblr.com account, and number three, make a fanfiction.net account. That's right, people. Before I was on Archive of Our Own, I was on fanfic.net, baby. Which is horrifying, I know. Just to explain why that was an ask for permission thing, my parents decided that they weren't going to give me unfettered access to the internet until I was like a teenager, 13 or 14-ish. They let me have some access to some things on the internet, and I was the type of kid that naturally told my mom most things anyway, for better or for worse. And so my mother was very aware of the fact that I was reading fanfiction. I had shown her fanfiction.net, not let her read anything on it because I wasn't that crazy even at that age. But I was like, hey mom, look, there's this website that exists where people write stories based on stories that I like. And my mom was stoked that this existed, and I would like read it on my iPod Touch or whatever. So on my 13th birthday, my parents decided that I was in fact mature enough to be trusted with the freedom of the internet, because my parents are very much of the camp, as I believe they should have been, of like, we need to make sure that she's old enough to use common sense, to use good sense, to, the whole don't talk to strangers on the internet sort of thing. And now, the one thing that I did do that if I could go back in time and not do, I would. I did use my real first name on the internet, which my parents did not have an issue with because my first name is quite a common first name, and so it doesn't necessarily, like, give any indication of where I lived and whatever. However, it was a pain in my butt to try to go through all my Tumblr, even with Xkit installed, if you know, you know, and remove usage of my legal first name when I decided to start going by Cam from the internet. So that was a bit of a bummer, but otherwise it was a great experience. And so I think about that birthday a lot because it did, for better or for worse, set me off on the trajectory that my life was destined to take. And I don't necessarily believe in fate or anything, but I do believe that everything happens for a reason. And for me, obviously, the entrance into fandom resulted many years later in me being here in your ears today. Now, when I joined fandom, I realized pretty quickly that I got along better with people who happened to be a couple years older than me. This could have been due to a variety of things. I don't really know what it was, if it was that I was mature for my age because of trauma, because I was homeschooled, because I hung out with adults a lot in my everyday life, or it's just how we naturally collided. Who's to say? But I very clearly remember befriending a group of people in the first fandom that I entered when I joined Tumblr. And for context, I was 13 in 2011. So this was like, I was on Tumblr during Tumblr's golden era of chaos. I was there for the Super Hulock thing. I was there for the Mishapocalypse. Like, I witnessed it all. So on Tumblr at that time, it was a booming ecosystem. To me now, Tumblr feels like a ghost town. I don't know why. It's quite strange. But I did join Tumblr and immediately fall in with a group of people in a fandom that I loved and enjoyed, and we all just kind of bonded, as one does, I think. And the median age of those individuals was 17. And I probably brought the median down a little bit because I was like 13, 14, 15. Now, I never hid that I was a minor because I had seen a lot of posts on Tumblr of people basically saying, like, I'm an adult. Please, dear God, if you are not an adult, tell me, because, like, the way that I act around you is going to be different. Again, very smart, very sensible. As an adult now in fandom, I feel the same way. When I'm in company of those under 18, I'm gonna watch myself a little bit closer. We're gonna get to my thoughts on that in a minute because I do have thoughts. But I never felt like it was weird. To me, age did not really matter because we were just talking about a story that we liked and writing fan fiction together and being weird little freaks on the internet. And for the record, through all of this, when I say freaks, I mean that in the most complimentary way possible because I am very much a ship and let ship, let your freak flag fly kind of person. And I always have been because fandom is where you go to experiment with those sorts of things. And also, I'm in the Locked Tomb fandom. It doesn't get much freakier than that. Tumblr quickly became a place for me to get an understanding of the world and of culture and of the fact that age doesn't really matter. And because of that, I was never quite sure what to do with the people who would make posts online being like, oh my gosh, when you're like 25 plus, you should not be in fandom anymore. Like, you are an adult, you're grown up, like, you should be worried about adult matters. And I was always like, that doesn't make any sense because, like, some of my favorite fanfic authors in this fandom are over 30. Some of my favorite people in these fandoms are, like, at least 5 years older than me. What do you mean that's old? What do you mean I'm going to, quote, unquote, "age out of fandom?" And the older that I got, the more nonsensical it became to me, but I also had this little, like, niggling fear in my gut that at some point, at some age that I turned, either A, I would be, like, found out to be, quote, unquote, "too old" and simultaneously ousted from all my fandom spaces, which was a ridiculous fear, I know, but I was, like, 14, go with me here. Or number 2, I would, like, wake up on the morning of some birthday of mine and suddenly feel 0 desire to be part of fandom. Or, what was arguably in my mind the worst case scenario, number 3, I would just feel it slowly fading from me. The desire to be in fandom, the want to be part of a fandom ecosystem, the all-consuming hyperfixation on a story, like, as I got older, that would just drain from me, and I would watch it happen and not feel anything about it except, well, that was a childish part of my life, but I guess it's over now, and that scared the crap out of me most of all. When I say on TikTok that I have always been like this, that I have never changed, I do indeed mean that I have always been like this and I have never changed. In a lot of ways, I have grown as a person, but in the fandom way, absolutely not. I have always been this way, and I'm likely always going to be this way. And that makes me very happy because I never wanted to have that experience of, like, slowly phasing fandom out of my life. And I don't think that's going to happen. Thank God. Now, I've also watched as fandom shifts a lot, and I'm not necessarily sure how I feel about fandom shifting a lot. Like, on one hand, I believe that the prevalence of fandom accelerating during the pandemic, during the height of the pandemic, I should say, because the pandemic is still very much happening. But the acceleration of fandom, I don't think is necessarily a bad thing. I've long held the belief that fandom is for everyone, and whenever I encounter anyone in the wild who wants to join the fandom fold, I'm always like, "Yes, welcome, join us, it's great over here," but I won't deny that the fandom culture in many places has shifted as a result of people who don't really have a concept of fandom etiquette entering fandom, and I think it's a two-pronged problem because on one hand, you have young people, people in their teens, kids that are my age, the age that I was rather when I joined fandom, who don't know how to act because no one's ever told them. But then you also have, like, the adults or the older people in fandom who are, like, not willing to teach these young folks or the first timers, regardless of age, who come in. And that's, like, it's part of the problem, you know? Like, I'm sorry to say, but if you're gonna be a good fandom citizen, you need to be willing to educate instead of just running straight toward cancellation. So at age 13, I joined fandom, right? And it was somewhere around, like, age 23, 24, 25 that I realized that I have become the fandom elder to whom I once looked up. And I'm not saying that, like, I'm old. Again, like, I'm not. 27 is not old. And anyone who thinks that 27 is old has a very interesting outlook on life because 27 is not old. And also, if you can see, like, my face on video, if you've ever seen my face, I do not look like I'm 27. Someone asked me over the weekend what college I attended. I have 2 degrees. I'm done with both of them. I graduated. I'm done with college. I'm used to it, though. One time I was traveling through the Atlanta International Airport and was asked where my unaccompanied minor paperwork was. And at the time I was 24, and I had to show ID to prove that I was, in fact, 24 and not a minor child traveling unaccompanied. So, there's always that. As, like, a net kind of summary of the people I'm in company with online, I am at the older end of the age spectrum. While before I could count on both of my hands a couple times over how many people I knew that were in my spheres who were older than me by, like, a market amount, now it's maybe like 5 or 6 people. And that's really weird to me, not because I particularly care or put any stock in that, but because I am now at the age and stage where I'm like, well, back in my day, in this era of fandom, and people are like, yeah, I know, people are romanticizing this era of fandom on TikTok now, which is another really horrifying thing. Like, trust me, you didn't want to be there on 2016 Tumblr. You really didn't. I didn't necessarily want always to be there on 2016 Tumblr. Whenever Tumblr was confronted with the absolute shit show that was the Hundred's decision to kill off Lexa, I was there for that. It was a bad time. There's a lot of things about the internet that you don't really want to romanticize. Trust me. Just please, dear God, trust me. Now, that said, it does lead me to something that I've kind of been reflecting on. I did want to go on a brief tangent about the fandom culture because I made a TikTok video a few weeks ago of basically like just, it was to one of those trending audios. And it was me, the caption was me saying, like, me typing faster when someone starts puritanical nonsense in one of my fandom spaces. And I do stand by that. I've always been a ship and let ship gal. I've always been what the kids call a pro shipper. I think no matter what side of the debate that you're on in terms of like what is okay content, censorship is not okay. Censorship is how we get dictatorships, and censorship is very real and present in the United States of America, which is where I live already, and we don't need to be helping them. We don't need to be obeying in advance by trying to censor our fellow fans. As proof of how old school I kick it in fandom spaces, I'm still using phrases like, don't read, which was a very popular phrase when I first entered fandom in the 2010s. And honestly, I think it should come back because that is at the core of it. But in that same vein, I think that we as a fandom society have missed the plot in a couple places. And I've kind of been doing some research into this because I write a newsletter under my legal name about fandom in preparation for marketing my TED Talk whenever that comes out. But I've been doing some research into like how fandom has shifted because I've noticed a marked shift in fandom and fan spaces in like the beginning of the 2020s. And at first I thought that it was just me. And then I thought it was just me being change resistant. But as I've been doing like research and looking around, it does seem to be that fandom as a community shifted markedly during lockdown. And I think that that is like threefold. Number one, more people were engaging with media and so finding fandom spaces, which is awesome. Great. Happy to have you. Come on in. We're all insane. Join the freaks. On another hand, I think another reason is because people who are already in fandom were in fandom more. And number three, a new social platform emerged, TikTok, as a place for fans to gather. And TikTok especially brought with it a younger age demographic. We got back to the 13-year-olds, the 14, 15-year-olds joining fandom. Now, is that a bad thing? No. Like I said, welcome to fandom. Everyone is welcome here. I have always 110% believed that. Just because I grew up in fandom and was steeped in it doesn't mean that I'm gatekeepy about it. However, with fandom comes responsibility, especially for people like me who have been in fandom for a long time. There's an ecosystem at play here, and part of that ecosystem is that we play nicely with each other. And this is where I think it falls apart a little bit. Because, see, in order to be a fair participant in fandom, there has to be present two things: the freedom to experiment and the freedom to fail. Let me explain what I mean by that. In my day in my day in fandom, when I said something out of pocket, a friend of mine, a fandom elder, and by that I mean older than me, would come to me and say, hey, that was not cool. This is why. And I would say, oh, I'm so sorry. I will go fix that or make an apology or whatever it is. And that was that. I believe that the potential for that exchange is absent from today's fandom spaces. And I believe that is part of why fandom has descended into a different, maybe less ideal form of madness than the fandom that I grew up in. And I've seen other people all over the internet talk about this phenomenon too. I believe that this is a twofold problem, right? On one hand, the fandom elders are either not doing this or they're going straight to what the kids call cancellation, canceling the young people instead of giving them a chance to learn. But then on the other hand, you have young people who I believe are so afraid of being canceled or so unwilling to understand what it was that was not cool about what they did that they double down and then they make it worse, the environment around them worse, the toxicity of it worse, whatever it is, they make it worse. And it's a cyclical thing that can only be broken if one side chooses to be mature. And I would urge the fandom elders, those of us who have been here for a while, to be those people, because that's the only way this is going to change. A lot of times it is truly genuinely that the young people just don't know any better because you don't know what you don't know. And especially now, like young people, They might not look like how many teenagers have you seen look like teenagers anymore? It's nowhere near what it was like, when I was a teenager. Um, but just because they don't look young, it doesn't mean they're not. If they're young and they don't know any better, like, we need to have some grace for them. I think that, like, if I could say one thing about fandom and how it's changed, it would be that. It would be that I would urge the ecosystem to broaden and expand to include grace for people who make honest mistakes, but then also the people who do make the honest mistakes need to be grown enough, mature enough, responsible enough to take ownership, learn, and do better. Because that's all it has to be. And every time I see something that could have simply been that conversation dissolve into cancellation and stitch wars and subtweeting and all this stuff, I'm just kind of like, it didn't used to be this bad. And like, maybe it was in some fandoms. I don't know. I can only speak for where I was, but I was in some really popular fandoms in their heyday, including but not limited to, and I'm totally exposing myself here, the Mortal Instruments, the 100, the Locked Tomb. Like, I've been around and I've seen that, well, sometimes that's the case. It was not the norm the way it is now. And that is, like, particularly sad and frustrating to me because it doesn't have to be this way. Okay, so on to other things about aging, and I'm going to preface it with this. This next section is going to touch on several content pillars is the first phrase that came to mind because I work too much. Oh God. This section is going to touch on several topics that could be triggering to some people, including um, mentions of childhood familial abuse and mentions of mental health related factors, suicidality, etc. If that's not your cup of tea, you might just want to stop here. Just wanted to throw that out there. It's not going to be deeper in depth, but it is a part of like my story and thoughts about getting older. So take that with a grain of salt. But anyway, I digress. So when I was a kid, I didn't like my birthdays because they always were a little bit fraught for family-related reasons that I won't go into here, but also because I genuinely was not expecting to live past 18, which unfortunately I think is a sentiment that a lot of people who are my age now felt back then. For me, it was not only because I was very mentally ill, which I was with undiagnosed depression and anxiety, but it was also because I had grown up being told what my future was going to look like from a health perspective, and it was not a future that I wanted because I watched my mom be trapped in an abusive marriage because she couldn't afford to leave because she wasn't able to work for health reasons, but she wasn't the right kind of sick to qualify for disability. And my mom kept saying, you need to hurry up and get better or this is going to be your future. And I didn't know a lot, but I knew that I wasn't, physically as healthy as I quote unquote should have been. And so I was terrified of that becoming my future and I didn't want that to be my future. And so I never actually like took action, but I came pretty close. I had a plan. The only thing that I was missing was like I didn't want someone to be traumatized by finding me. So imagine my shock when, because my birthday's in April, and my parents came to me and were like, "Okay, you need to start thinking about applying to colleges." And I was like, I don't know how I got here. I don't know how I got this far." And I will never forget, like the weekend after my birthday, sitting there looking at like the Common Application. I don't know if anyone does the Common App anymore, but the Common Application, if you know what that is, just being like, is it worth it? Like, is it worth wasting my time? And ultimately, I decided to do it. And I will never forget, like, I half-assed the Common App. Like, I cannot express, I did not care because I genuinely didn't think I was going to like live to see the fruits of that labor. And somehow managed to get into all 4 colleges that I applied for, including getting a scholarship to an Ivy League school. I did not end up attending said Ivy League, but yeah, that was something. I also didn't know that it was an Ivy League when I applied. That's a story for another time though. But as I got older, my feelings about my birthday morphed from like the feeling of like, oh, I didn't think I'd get this far, and now I'm here, to feelings of like, okay, how much farther can I go? Which I take as growth, genuinely, and I think that's a good thing. One of the main ways that has shown up in terms of like my own self is reprioritizing and like watching like from semi outside myself as I reprioritize. Like in my mid-20s and even a little bit in my early 20s, my priorities were very different than they are now. Like as I'm looking toward age 27, I'm like, okay, how can I lower my cost of living so that I can save for retirement? Whereas even like 2 years ago, I was like, that's a problem for future Cam. But I guess I'm now future Cam, so maybe that's it. But it's been very weird to like self-reflect and feel like my brain developing and solidifying. I know there's a lot of talk about like when the frontal lobe actually does that, but that's not the point of this video, this podcast, whatever it is you're watching or listening to. But yeah, it was very interesting to reflect on like turning another year older and about how different my priorities have been. Then it's also weird just like staring down the barrel of all of these changes that have been made to my life, both externally and like by my own choice. But and I'm sure this is a sentiment that unfortunately anyone listening to this who's, chronically ill in any way will relate to. A little part of me is also like, wow, I am turning another year older and I'm still sick. And like, I know that I'll always be sick. Like, I have genetic problems. Like, you cannot undo my genetics. If we could, I would undo a lot of genetics. If nothing else, I would make myself taller. I would love to be tall. The spirit of Ed Elric from Full Metal Alchemist has possessed me. I'm better now, but I know I'm never going to be like, I'm never going to be perfectly healthy. I'm never going to be healthy, period. But a little part of me is always going to wish that it was better than this because I have so much fatigue and I have so much chronic pain and I have so little energy and I have such a foggy, terrible brain half the time. And there's just a lot about my body that is sick and that I wish wasn't. And the voice in my head that sounds suspiciously like my mother's is always going to be there, being like, this is your future. How long is it going to be until you can't afford to work anymore? And I have a feeling that's at least part of why I'm so resistant to like I've dated once when I was 21, and I'm not in any I'm not dating. I can't imagine ever dating, and part of that I think is because I can't quite shake myself free of this notion that like anyone who dates me or marries me would be chained to me and the sinking ship that is my body, because that's the framework that I was raised with. And so that's not fair to a future partner. I believe that if I'm meant to date someone, they'll like happen to me, but my life is so robust right now without that's fine by me. But I think about that sometimes too, because when I turned 25 and I started making decisions about what I was going to do with my health care, I adopting a second cat, if that was going to happen, like all these choices that I was making, I remember feeling pretty sad because I honestly thought all through my growing up years that by age 25, 26, I'd be making these big life decisions alongside my spouse. And that's also weird to think about because, like, I don't necessarily believe that you can quote unquote age out of the dating scene. I think that whoever you're meant to find and be with, you will find and be with when the time is right. But I will always feel a little bit sad because I thought that I'd be building a life alongside someone that I loved and who loved me. And we were going to do life together. And the older that I get, the less it looks like that's going to happen. And it's not necessarily tied to my age, it's just tied to the passage of time. And that makes me kind of sad because, you can't really control that as your life goes on, it becomes more solidified. Where I live is going to be where I live. The stuff that I accumulate, the way I arrange my house, there's not going to be a lot of room for another person. And again, that's not like, it's not a bad thing. It's just there, but it does, I'm not blind to the fact that it will affect my relationship with the notion of dating. That would of course require someone to have a thing for me and tell me that they have a thing for me, which that's probably not going to happen. But like, even if we did get there, like my life is set. It's set up for me and my cats. And I don't know, it's just always kind of like a weird thing to think about. Like, yeah, no, I don't know if I'm ever going to have a partner to do life with. And if I don't, that's okay. It just means I wasn't meant to have that experience in my lifetime. But it's an experience that I kind of want to have. And I'm always kind of melancholy about that's still too strong. I was going to say sad, but that's too strong either. I'm just kind of always like, about it. Like, it sucks. But again, if it's not going to happen, it's not going to happen. But in any case, I am excited to get older because I like being the fandom old. I like being the older one in fandom, the one that knows how things are going because she's seen it happen before, the one who knows how to usher other people into fandom, welcome them, show them around, archive of our own, tell them to stay away from fanfiction.net. I genuinely like that. I like being part of that ecosystem and giving back to the fandom first timers the way that it was given to me when I was young, because now, this era in fandom, people are joining fandom who are adults who've just never been in fandom before. And that to me is also very special and precious for a different reason. It takes a special kind of very secure adult to try something new with their whole chest on the internet. And I want to celebrate that and reward that by being like, welcome to fandom, come on in, we're all freaks here. And every time I enter a new fandom, which typically it's at least on Tumblr, if not also on TikTok, I'm always reflecting on how, when I do that, I know I'm going to be welcomed with open arms because for all of fandom's flaws, that is the one thing that I can count on being the same. No matter where I go, no matter how I come in or when I come in, I will be welcomed. And that is very special to me. For that, I'm very grateful. I mean, that's the whole reason that I'm here. That's the whole reason why I'm doing this and hanging out with y'all on the internet is because of fandom. Like most of y'all, I would wager, found me because of The Locked Tomb. And my talking about that on TikTok. And that's really cool to me because, again, without that, I wouldn't be here. but I've been at Fandom so long that it just feels like I'm always going to be here, and that's great. Also, I have a degree in creative writing that I can now use to write fan fiction that hurts people's feelings. So there's that. Anyway, thanks for joining me for Cam's birthday omnibus. If you want to read more of my ramblings in print form, you can find me on Substack. The link is in whatever form of a description this particular episode is being delivered to you, YouTube or Apple Podcast, Spotify, wherever. Go where the description is and you'll find the link. It is absolutely buckwild to me to say this, but people have given me their own hard-earned dollars and cents for my writing, which is absolutely insane and like just makes my brain melt out of my ears. So if you're listening to that, thank you. It is never expected and always very kindly appreciated and deeply humbling and kind of scary in a cool way. Also, if you have the ability to comment on this episode, I would welcome, because I'm thinking this is a bit, I need to make a TikTok video about this because I want to like gauge interest, because this sounds fun, but it does require money. I learned about a website where it's like a subscription model. It's like $5 a month to creators, and then like they get a letter sent to them every month. Like, I'm not explaining it very well, but like basically anyone who wants to receive mailed correspondence from me could sign up, and it's like a $5 a month thing. And then you get like a written letter from me. And that sounds really fun because I love pen pals and I love that sort of thing. But I don't know if that's something people would want to do because, like, money and times are tight right now, and I know that. So if that's something that you'd be interested in, tell me in whatever commenting function this has. But anyway, I digress. You can find me on Substack. You can find me on TikTok. Yeah, come hang out with me. It's always a blast. If you join me on TikTok as of this recording, you will watch me descend into madness because I'm watching a new anime. It's called The Apothecary Diaries, and it's been all over my For You page recently. And I got totally blindsided. I'm watching the dub, and I was blindsided because the male lead character is voiced by the same guy who voices Jujutsu Kaisen Satoru Gojo. And I was like, why is Gojo here? Like, I cannot take this man seriously because he's Gojo, but the character looks like Suguru Gato. So it's a bizarre mind F. But anyway, you can watch my descent into that madness and more via my TikTok. Thank you for being here. Thank you for celebrating my birthday with me. And yeah, stay cool. Until next week. Bye.